So how you doing this morning? Yeah, you're good. I'm going to say you're even better than what you think you are. Seriously. You're all doing better than what you're aware of. So you're good, but you're even better than good. And is Tom Trissler? Is Tom? Tom's back there, and if you think you're doing, Tom's here today, and I know Tom has kidney stones. And if any of you guys ever had those or gone through it, and you don't have them today, you're very appreciative. And I was just talking to Tom before the service, and I go, Tom, when are you going to get those? How you doing? You take them out? And he's got a big one here and a smaller one lower, and I'm just, But they're not sure when they can do anything because he has to get some okay from a cardiologist for Tom's heart, and so he's kind of waiting around. I don't know when I'll be able to have these things removed or blasted out or whatever they're going to do. And then Scott, who was up here, who gave the announcements, he had a kidney stone a couple months ago. And he was talking, and Scott's an elder, so we're at an elder meeting, and Scott's telling the pain he had, and it was so bad, Tara, his wife's driving him to the hospital, and he's hanging on to that handle above the door, and Scott's like this. He's like this. And I'm going, that isn't funny. I mean, I've never had the, and I'm so glad I never experienced having a kidney stone, but the pain that a person is in when they have that, and there's other things, obviously, that bring pain to your world. When I was in seminary up at Grace in Winona Lake, I worked at Kosciuszko Community Hospital for a while. And I was a clerk, so I did different things, but sometimes I clerked back in the ER. And so you see all this stuff coming in. If you ever work in the ER in any capacity, it just changes how you see so much. I know after every shift, I always drove home more careful than when I drove in. And not that I was reckless driving in, but I was always so careful because about every night there were car accidents and other kinds of things that came in. And one of my jobs was to go in, and when they would bring someone in and try to get the information, who they are, and address, you could run a chart so the physicians would know what to work off. And so I went into the room. They had this lady and had this sheet over her, and up to here, she was on a gurney, and she was unconscious, so I couldn't get information. Sometimes you have to go to the wallet and purse. But I was walking in there. It didn't hit me at first that something wasn't right. Now I know she wasn't. What reason you're there is something's not right, but there's something visual, and I couldn't put my finger on it at the time until I realized she was laying there on her back, but her feet were sticking out. One foot was pointed this way, the other, I kid you not, was pointed the other way, and I go, that's not right. I'm not a doctor, but I know if your feet are doing that, you're having a bad day, real bad day. And you know that every human being is a walking system of portable plumbing. We are. It's a miracle. Every human body. And the fact that if your plumbing is operating well, just give thanks. Because when it's not, you are in misery and you are on your way to the ER. You can't go very long with some kind of plumbing problem before you are in incredible pain, and in fact, if you don't take care of it, you will die. And so when we talk about God's grace, just be aware if you don't have kidney stones, and basically you don't. Can I just call it? You can go to the bathroom fine. I know that maybe sounds weird coming up from here, but that's not. You don't have to think about it. Oh yeah, I can take. And if that's going well for you, you are so blessed. And if you don't think so, just talk to someone who can't or who isn't. And they would give anything to be in your physical situation. And I go, a lot of this isn't just because of good luck or taking care of yourself, although do that. A lot of it's God's grace. And often we miss it. As I was saying last week, God doesn't have to do a wow for you to experience His presence in your life. He doesn't have to do a wow for you to be wowed. Because His grace is all the time. Often we think of His grace, we think of His salvific, His salvation grace, and that's certainly there, but He didn't just stop at salvation. You were on His receiving end of His grace before salvation, at salvation, and now post-salvation, we're still on the receiving end of His grace. And if we could just tap into that, if we could just understand how much of His grace all the time is our way, and I go, the test that you understand and live in His grace is you don't complain. And that's one of the things that seems it's most natural for most people. It's so easy to complain because something in your life is not going as you would like, or maybe even as it should, but it's not, and so we get into complaint mode. And I'll just say that just should tell everyone something that you are not seeing, you're not living in the knowledge of His grace, or you wouldn't do that, because when you live in His grace, what you find, it's absolutely impossible to complain. You can't do it. You can't pull it off. Who said that? Thank you. Thank you. I think that's the second one I've got since I've been here. But it's true. So this morning, we're in this series on God's grace in, or God's grace within the church, and it's huge. And we're going to be talking about worship this morning, and how God's grace comes by way of worship, what worship is, and why it's important, and how it changes our lives. And so I want to go to this passage, 5 verses here, that Christ talks about in the Gospel of John. It says this. It says, "Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and you people say that in Jerusalem, yeah, that's the place where men ought to worship." Jesus said, this is the woman that was at the well. He says, "Woman, believe me, an hour is coming when neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem shall you worship the Father. You worship that which you don't even know." See, that's incredible. Everyone worships something or someone. Right? Everyone does. And Jesus says, well, you worship, you don't know, you don't even get it. You're worshiping something, but it's not what should be worshiped. You don't even know what you're doing. Are people spiritual today? They're more spiritual than ever today, but they're not all spiritual when it comes to Christianity or Christ. But they're all spiritual somehow. Here's the question. Are you more physical or spiritual? Here, the answer is you're much, much, much more spiritual than you are physical. But what we see is the physical, and the physical gets most of the attention, but really you're so much more spiritual. He says, you worship what you don't know. We worship what we know. Salvation is from the Jews. But, he says, an hour is coming, and now it's coming, but it's here. Why? Because Christ says, because I'm here. When the true worshipers shall worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be His worshipers. That's an incredible thought, too. God seeking out those to worship in. God's Spirit, them who worship Him must worship in spirit and truth. So, the word worship, worshipped, worshipers occurs 10 times right here in these 5. Such a concentration of worship or worthship. And so it's the emphasis here. When you have that many words, same words in such a small section, it is pay attention to that, because that's what's going on here. It's quite impactful. It's quite important. Here, I'm going to throw this out. I believe it 100%. Nothing is more important than worship. In your life and mine, nothing displaces worship as far as importance and priorities. The most important thing. That's why I say everyone worships someone or something. Sometimes it's self. That's self-worship. That is idolatry. And that's not good. An idol is anything that competes with God for worship. See, it should only be God. Here we're singing some words that, God is enough, Father's enough. When we sing it, and it really is true, but we need to really live that out. And we don't have to think very long, do we? Before we come up with some things that are idolatrous, that which competes with God for our time and our attention and our trust, for our joy, for all these things. One thing is self. I'll say that most, if not all, people are much more selfish than what they realize. And oftentimes it doesn't take much, namely a relationship, to reveal how selfish you are. It's easy to think that you're doing really well when you're holed up in a cave somewhere by yourself. But once you get in a relationship, guess what happens? You enjoy it, but they begin to kind of point out some flaws that you were not aware of. And often we don't thank them, we get defensive, and we call out their flaws, and it becomes sort of a flaw war that happens. So it's oneself, but there are some people who idolize their spouse. You might be wish that was me, but some people do. And that person becomes more important than God. If you've ever, and I'm just talking to husbands, if you've ever said the phrase, well, I got to keep my wife happy. She probably likes to hear that, but it's not really true. You need to love her, but that doesn't mean that keeping her happy is the main thing, because sometimes what you'll find is to love her does not mean to immediately make her happy. And I think all of us, we get that you've been married. You understand it's not always just, we guys, somebody joke about the honey-do list and those things, happy wife, happy life, and that stuff. But I want to go just love your wife. Don't make her the center of your world. Or our children. It's amazing what people will do for their kids or grandkids. Almost anything. Of course, love them. They're important, absolutely, but don't displace God because of your family. Or money. That's a big one for most people most of the time. Money. I'm kind of tight with money. Some of you know me. He's more than tight. He's, my wife's Scottish, and so they're supposed to be tight with money, but she's really not. And and so you have those things going on. But if you want to mess people up, no, I'm talking about money. And for many, it's an idol or looks, how one looks. I think especially when you're younger, when you get to be older, it's not that we don't care at all, but it just doesn't have the importance it once did. We're just glad to be pain-free, right? We're just glad not to have arthritis. What we look like just isn't as important as it used to be. But prestige. You can on and on and on. Comfort, security, and go. Nothing wrong with those things, but don't let this stuff displace God. Don't let them give you a greater joy than what God does. It's only right to enjoy the things and people that God has given to us. Enjoy it, absolutely, but it's only right to enjoy God the giver much more than what He has given. I think some people, they come to God because what He can do for them, and they don't come to Him for Him. There's a difference. I talked about my kids last week a little bit, and I like it when they come to me, but I don't want them to come to me just to get something. I want them to come to me just for conversation or just to enjoy each other's company. Sometimes I'll give them stuff, well, certainly, but not just that. Here, take care not to fall into idolatry, because our God is a jealous God. Now, worship, try to further define this. Worship is the activity of glorifying God in His presence with our voices and hearts. That's what we do. Glorify isn't a term we use much outside of church. It's not a word that floats around there. So to glorify basically is to give honor, to make important, to give praise, to trust in. That which is magnificent, wonderful, lovely, basically beyond belief. If you were to think of the most meaningful things in your life, that person, that experience, when you felt most alive. A question I ask folks sometimes these days is, apart from, let's say they're married, apart from the day you got married, apart from when you had kids, apart from when you got saved, what was your peak experience in your life? Because I took away what I call the obvious ones. When did you feel most alive? I think it's a great question, because I don't even think often they even know it until they think about it and then go, there needs to be something. When were you the happiest? At what point in your life? What was going on? If you could rewind the tape, where would you rewind it to and plus play and rewind it and plus what window would you keep reliving again and again and again and again? And often that's a place of worship. When we give it, him, her, the glory, when we speak in positive terms and we tell it with excitement, that which we never tire of reliving in our minds or telling people about. Here, apart from they got married, kids were born, when you got saved, what do you like telling people about? And it comes out with enthusiasm. And when I'm telling you, I'd like to come here and tell you, and I'd like to come and tell you, and because it was a wonderful time. And I think we all have a time or times like that. But it's a place, if you're not careful, it becomes a worship place. So here, worship is thinking or speaking of God positively with excitement. I have to add the excitement in. It's an emotional issue. It's not just some monotone, dull, theological treatise. I'm telling you, it's not just going through the words on a song. It's emotional. I'm excited about this. Now, number one, you don't need to be in church to worship. And I think you know that. You don't have to be here on Sunday to talk positively and to be excited about God. In John 4, where Jesus is having a conversation with this woman, she says, we worship in this mountain. And she says, you say it's in Jerusalem because that's where the Jewish folks, that's where the temple's at. And therefore, that's where you ought to worship. And so she brings up, where should it be? Should it be the mountain? Should it be Jerusalem? Jesus says, you know what? An hour is coming. In fact, it's right now. It's not about the mountain. It's not about Jerusalem. And what he's saying is, it's not about a place. Worship's not about, sure you worship in a temple. Sure you can worship in the mountains or in the woods. Sure you can. It's not the point. It doesn't matter where you're at when you worship because it's not about a place. Here again this morning, if you're surprised because we're talking, singing, praying to God, you shouldn't be. If you're new, you kind of walked in, well, I don't know. It's a church. What do you think we were going to be about? And so, well, sure, but it doesn't just stay in the church. I go, don't stop worshiping when you leave. Put it another way, don't segregate worship. Don't say, well, yeah, church, I've heard people say, I need a place to worship. And I'm going to go, yeah. I mean, that's everywhere. I mean, I know if there's I need a church, I need a place to worship, corporate worship. I get that. But don't stop worshiping at, for you guys, 11 o'clock this morning. Take it beyond the wall. See, we've gotten to a place, I think, where worship has become a place. And Jesus says, no, it's not. It's not. It never was a place. See, he goes in and says, see, yes, God is spirit, because God is spirit, and so God's like also omnipresent. God's everywhere, so really worship him everywhere. Not just in church on Sunday. Make every place a place of worship. There was a recent article written by a seminary professor, and he writes this, is enjoying God through the game of baseball. Now, some of you are going, yeah, oh, come on. Baseball, again, I don't like baseball. It's not primarily about baseball. But it's where the thought is, normal, we don't think about worshiping when we're at or when we're playing or when we're watching baseball. But don't make this just baseball. It's basically enjoying God or worshiping God outside of religious places. So he says this. This is how I enjoy God. And I say, and when you enjoy God, I believe you're also worshiping God through baseball. He says, baseball trains future men and women. Joy in playing baseball becomes joy in God when I recognize that physical training has some value, including value as a picture of training in godliness. It's like 2 Timothy 4:8, which basically says, discipline yourself for godliness. So it's training. And so as I see folks training, it helps me think, oh yeah, I also need to be training for purposes of godliness. I need to be practicing. I mean, and practice just means this, I'm trying to get better. If a team doesn't practice and the other team does, who probably is going to win the game? And you know the answer to that. Probably the other team. They've been working at it. You just thought you could show up. No. When it comes to things of God, don't think you can just show up. You've got to practice. You've got to put in the time. It would be good to have a coach or a spiritual mentor, because every athlete does better when they have a coach. Every team does better when they have a coach. That's why they have coaches. That's why they have people that sometimes we pay money so my son or daughter or grandson gets this special coach, and the best coaches out there can make a lot of money, but we just know that if they don't have that, they're not going to do as well as they could. We can do self-coaching, but it all falls apart at some point. So baseball trains future men and women, and so we should also be in training for godliness. He says also this, is baseball allows me to express God's heart. He says joy in baseball becomes joy in God when I share joy with my sons, and therefore I love them by showing them what God is like. In this article, his dad was a baseball player fan. He has two sons ours. That gives you a little bit of the context. And the baseball helps him move toward holiness. They go, what? Yeah. It becomes joy in God when it helps me to kill sin and pursue holiness. It helps me move toward holiness, because I'm not doing anything that's ungodly. I've just liked baseball all my life. And when I was a kid, I collected baseball cards. And I never gave many away, so guess what? I got a lot of baseball cards. Guess what I still do? I go on eBay and I check out the baseball cards that I want to buy. And then almost every night I have a little stack. This might sound weird. But I kind of look at, 5 or 6, 10 baseball cards that I have I really like. And I put them up, and on I go. You say, well, that sounds like you could be doing something much better with your time and all that. Well, can I just say this? It keeps me from doing other things that I know I oughtn't be doing. And so there's a certain joy in it. I don't really play anymore. I really can't, but I can still enjoy the game. Then he finally says this, baseball points me to the world to come. He says, my sorrow on the field points me forward to the day when sorrows and sighings flee away. Because there's always a disappointment for every person in any game. No player gets a hit every time he or she gets up to bat. No one gets on base every time. No pitcher strikes out every batter. They'll give up a home run, so there's sorrow and disappointment. But it always says, well, next time, next at bat, next pitch, next game, next year. It points them to a future as life in Christianity ought to point you to a future when Christ returns or one day when we reign with Him for eternity in heaven. So it points us somewhere. And so anyway, he's giving this spiritual aspect of baseball. But you can do that with anything. It's not just that. Whatever you might do. Finally, this author writes, joy in the things of earth become joy in God, as they ought to be. So you baseball fans, worship in the midst of baseball. Can I say this? Worship God as you drive. Well, that's where we need to worship God. When you get in your car. Some of you drove this morning, and I'm guessing another car was coming in the opposite direction, wasn't it? And by the very fact you're here means the car stayed in their lane. I've been driving for a number of years. Never have I had a car swerve so far that it hit me head on. I hope the day never comes. The fact that, what do you think keeping that car in its lane? Well, one, the driver is paying attention, but I would say beyond that is the grace of God. Because even every driver that does pay attention, sometimes there are mechanical things. Wheels fall off. My son came to me about a couple months ago and said, hey, Dad, something's wrong with the car. I was driving back, and I know, it sounds like a flat tire. But it's not. So I said, well, and I'm not a mechanic. I get in the car, and I drove it down a ways. I go, man, it sure sounds like a flat tire. I looked out, but all tires are inflated. I don't know. So I called, there was a guy in the church. They were practicing the night. Would you come out and take a look at this car? He drove about 10 feet. About every single one of your lug nuts is about to fall off this particular tire. We'd had the tires rotated at somewhere, and they tightened them up. They didn't tighten these up as they should have. So I'm just thinking, my son was driving 60, coming down US 24 with this thumpity thump, and his tire about fell off. I go, what kept the tire from falling off? It's more than good luck. I'm going to put in God's grace. The fact that a car doesn't swerve over, it's not just he's paying attention because there's mechanical things. Hey, people have health issues, and sometimes they go out. The reason you've been able to drive this long and not get hit by another car head on, it's God's grace. And to see things just like that. They said, well, dumb people don't know how to put on, that kind of stuff. It's God which kept you from doing that. So worship God when you drive. And give God thanks. Every car that passes that doesn't come and hit you head on. or the fact you made it home, your tire didn't fall out, your car didn't conk out. I mean, with these days, any little thing that's like, I have all these lights going on in my car telling me. One thing, I was over somewhere and I was it wouldn't start back up, and all these lights are going. I go, that's not good. What I found out was the steering wheel was too far one way, and it won't start if your steering wheel is too far one way. So I corrected the steering wheel, and it started up. Hey, that's wonderful. Worship God at work. Can you do that? Oh man, it's going to be tough. Worship God at work. Worship God at home. Young folks, you go on a date, guess what? Oh, really? Worship God on a date. I know that sounds bad, sounds boring. Well, they'll never go out with me again. Worship God on a date. Worship God on vacation. And if you begin to think and speak excitedly about God, that's worship. You can do that anywhere. The fact that God is spirit means we should do it everywhere. Everywhere. No, you don't have to be in church. That means go do it everywhere. Mountains, temples, deer blind, work, school, driving, laying down to go to sleep, getting up, whatever, wherever. But the second thing is this: worship God in church. No, you don't have to be here, but that's not the point. God intends for worship to be both private and corporate. Those who worship in private are most ready to worship corporately. If you've been worshiping through the week, guess what happens on a Sunday? Man, you're really ready. But if you haven't, it just takes time to kind of get into it. There's a reason we don't start the service with me preaching. Why? Why do you think? Anybody? That's good. No, what? Can I just say that? People, by and large, are not prepared. They're not ready to hear the Word of God. You talk to people that up here, and they say, you know what? It takes them, I don't know, sometimes just to get them to quiet down, to pay attention. It takes a while to get them there. Their spirit is not ready yet. We get there, but it takes a while. There have been times when we, at another church, we did like 1 or 2 songs, and we just thought, well, let me try to preach, and then you have most of the songs afterwards. It falls flat. I'm like halfway through before they even know what's going on. Maybe some churches you can do that, but most you can't. And so be ready, because when you worship together, hopefully your worship spills out onto others. See, when we worship together, if you came with doubts, grief, or struggles, the worship of others should serve as wonderful encouragement for you. Maybe you look around and you see some folks and you understand, you know, they've been through some stuff. And maybe it's worse than what you're going through now. And it gives you hope. They're here. They're worshiping. And if they can, I think that maybe I'll be able to as well. Now, you may never know that. They may never tell you. A lot of our witness goes without recognition. They don't say thanks. Maybe once in a while, but come to worship because it helps other people to also worship. Here, don't just privatize it. The worship of God always, in all of Judaism and Christianity, is always highlighted the corporate aspect. It's just, I think, in recent days where we've come up with this, well, I don't need to go to church, and, you know, electronically I can get a lot of the benefits, and therefore I don't want to get dressed, and I want to brush my teeth, and I don't want to drive, and I want to worship. I want to worship God while I'm watching the news, my cup of coffee, piece of toast. I mean, I want to, and you can certainly do that. But for the most part, do corporately for the benefit of other people. But sometimes it's you, isn't it? And you've been through tragedy. And you're the one that needs to be on the receiving end. When life doesn't make any sense, and life's just way too hard. And I'm reading, it seems like every week or so, of another prominent pastor who has given up his or her faith. And they're not even bothered by it. Yeah, I pastored a church, and normally these are big churches. And now, my faith's on the rocks, and I don't know what's going on with all that stuff, but they sure need to be in places of worship to renew their faith. So, when you're doing well, please don't privatize your worship. Don't do it. When you're not doing well, please don't privatize your worship. Don't withhold from others, and don't withhold from yourself. Because that's one thing of coming together and doing it with other believers. See, if you don't, you might start to think, I wonder if I'm nuts for being a Christian. I wonder if what all they're saying is right, because it seems like that's what they're all saying. I wonder if this is okay. I wonder if that Bible is not really that big of a deal. If you don't check that, pretty soon over time, it kicks in. Do you know what happens if you step away from corporate worship in a church for a while? Do you know what happens? Most people never come back. I needed a break, or I needed whatever. Some do, but most never come back. They decide, I don't need it. I go, oh my. It's a dangerous place. So worship is about giving, glorifying God. And when we give to God, when we glorify Him, it's healthy for us. Take care of your soul. It's more important than your body. And in it we're blessed. God's provided His grace, His undeserved favor. And when you live in His continual grace, you'll find it what? Impossible to complain. You won't be able to, even if you wanted to. Because those who pray should pray with thanksgiving. And when you pray with thanksgiving, you live with thanksgiving. And thankful people don't complain because they figured out they have nothing to complain about. Would you pray with me? Lord, thank you this morning. Your grace is everywhere. It's constant. If we fail to see it or recognize it, oh my, change our perception. We couldn't do anything apart from your grace. We're blessed all the time. Lord, help us to return thanks, to continually return thanks because your grace overwhelms us. Your grace is a wow. And people that are wowed don't speak negatively about life or other people because they can't. Because you become so real to them. Lord, thank you so much for being a God that continually pours out His grace, in the lives of all of us. Help us, therefore, Lord, to return favor, to return thanks, to speak in positive and exciting terms about you, because you deserve that. Lord, thanks for life, this one you've given to us, what we're going through even today. And we praise you now in Christ's name. Amen.